So this is your tools for the job. Again, it's just for ease, just for speed, and just for a sense of professionalism. Once you see it and know it, you're familiar with it. Sometimes the handles change, sometimes the company change, but this is your 10-inch box, this is your 12-inch box. They're sitting right beside each other. The pliers is specifically there just to tighten the box to the handle. Sometimes when you're moving that box and handle around, it tends to get loose. Try to tighten it all the time. Also, you may wonder, why do I have the knife? But you'll recognize in the video that I'm always cleaning the box because there's a lot of excess. That is the most ideal knife. A 4-inch is nice, a 3-inch is okay, but I find a 4-inch to be my preferred one. So I guess this video is mainly to highlight the idea of the box and how it works. Those are the numbers. Uh, the numbers are for like open and close of this. Tighter, tighter, less mud. Just think of it like that way. The higher the number, the less the mud. So it adds pressure to the spring. The spring pushes down the pins and gives this thing a more straighter edge. You want to leave some mud on the wall, so I say go with number 1, or for the beginner, go with number 2. Even go with number 3. If you're a beginner, go with number 3. Go with number 2 for more experience. Number 1, more experience. You know what you're doing, kind of a thing. Well, let's start with number 2. Let's do number 2 first. As the other. So, taping sometimes isn't explained well, but from my experience and my perception, when you tape a house, the whole purpose of the house is to bond slash seal the house. So and also to prevent cracks. The cracks will come. So pre-fill is to prevent cracks. Taping the house is to stop the house from moving in a sense and bond the house together. And now that you've accomplished that, you must hide the tape, right? You can always use a 10-inch knife to cover the house, right? So it's not as if you can't use a hand tool, but sometimes you have a big space, and efficiency and professionalism is a plus, let's say. So it's not an obligation, but this is the demonstration I'm using right now. You can always use a 10-inch knife. So you've got the gauge system down and you're covering the walls one joint at a time. I start with the factory edge, and the reasons will appear very obvious pretty soon. Mainly it's for the same exact reason of overlapping. You want to be aware of how you overlap everything in the house, because what tends to happen is that it appears a bit later. It causes more problem later. You're giving yourself more work. So I start with the factory edges first, then I move on to the butt joints, and that will be explained in further videos. But that's pretty much the basics of it, realistically speaking. There's nothing really complicated about covering the walls. You're literally just trying to hide the tape. As you see me here in the video, what I'm doing is taking off all the overlaps, the excess material that may have leaked out because I added too much pressure on the box. Um, but there's nothing too complicated about running the box. There's nothing too complicated about covering your tape. Smooth, clean, and flat. That's what you're going for when it comes down to taping. Smooth, clean, and flat. All these excess material you see me wiping off, it's simply because I do not want to sand it off later. Anything you leave on the wall now, you will need to sand it off later. So a certain sense of awareness in terms of, oh, why are you wiping off the edge? You can sand it off. Well, if you like sanding, then go right ahead. I can't argue with that. Some people like sanding. I don't like to sand, right? So I tend to clean as much as I possibly can throughout the process. Now I'm going to immediately transition into the butt joint, mainly for demonstration. With a butt joint, I leave the box completely open. That was a very quick snap of what you're going to see, but it's pretty much open the box completely because you're trying to build a high surface to hide the butt joint. The butt joint is an odd end in the drywall where two odd ends meet. the factory ends do not meet. So any point that you cut the drywall and the drywall meets, that is a butt joint. And you have to build somewhat of a bigger bridge. The tape is now sitting on the surface, not in an indentation. It's on the surface. So to make a surface almost invisible to the eyes, you must have a bigger slope. And that's kind of how that's one of my best definition of hiding a butt joint. Okay, so this is almost like a day two after the mud has been dried, and I'm doing some touch-ups on the flats. This is obviously a flat, um, and I don't know how to say it's obvious. To me, it's very obvious that this is a flat. It's not a butt joint, it's just one single stream. But I don't like to run my machine over the plugs and mess up the plugs for the electrician. I don't like to do that. I'd rather come around, use my knife, and do some detail work. That is my responsibility. Plus, I think it gives me a better finish. Not only that, but courtesy to the next person. It's just that simple for me. You could run the box through it. I don't know, some guys do it, but I don't do that. I tend to want to clean it by hand. There's many examples of what to do here, so take a look and see if you agree with me doing it this way. Sometimes you can pull back further, but there's quite a bit of examples around the light switches mainly that you need to apply some mud uh, delicately and just kind of mimic what happened. It's not complicated at all. It's not rocket scientist. The main thing to remember here is light, even, flat. That's the main thing to remember. Now, after this phase, what you're going to do is rough sand, right? So while you have the pan in your hand, while you have your 6-inch knife out, what you really need to do is cover all the little detailed area. I recommend it anyways, that you cover all these little areas. The box can't fit here, it's a corner bead. This is the right tool for the job, just hit it. Because after this, you're gonna do a rough sanding, so you might as well get rid of all these areas right now. I personally don't want to sand twice. I personally don't want to rough sand and then go back and rough sand. So what I tend to do in cases like this, I make sure the whole entire house, the whole entire workspace, the entire job is in one stage at a time. If it's taping, I do all the taping. If it's second coat, I do all the second coat. I don't want to do a second coat in a room that I'm skimming in. If I'm going to skim, It's just skim. So now we're moving on to the butt joints, and the butt joints are dry. I always try to say if you're going to work on material, work on the material when it's dry. It's a bit more complicated when it's wet, but this is an ideal way. The butt joints are technically the hardest thing on the job, so to speak, because the idea is to hide this tape that is obviously on the top of the surface. You don't want to build it too high, you don't want to build it too low. And the box does do a good job of giving you an even, consistent coat on both sides, and that will allow you to run your trowel, as you can see here, right on the top with a flat, even surface. In this case here, you're going to notice that I'm using a 10-inch knife um, to fill the butt joints in the exact same manner that I just used the and the trowel method to cover the butt joints. Now, I only demonstrate this because either way is ideal. It really comes down to what you're comfortable with. Some people will say that the knife is faster, smoother, easier to deal with. Some people will say the hawk and the trowel is way more easier on the body. So whichever way you want to choose to apply the mud to the wall, it is your choice. But at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is hide that tape. You're trying to build that bridge. You're trying to get all these creases. You're trying to cover the wall and get it ready for rough sanding. Keynote here, or just a thing to remember, there should be enough mud on the wall to sand the wall and there still be mud on the wall. Do not go too thin, but do not go too thick. If it's too thick, you're sanding it.